My husband supported me, raised our kids, and loved me, but I thought he held me back. Now, he's thriving without me, and I'm alone, drowning in regret. We were together for 8 years, which were mostly good, and we have 4 children. Around the 5-year mark, I received a job promotion, and I started to believe that my ex-husband was somehow holding me back for more success and a better life. We didn't have much money, but with my promotion, I was now earning more than he was. I began working longer hours while his hours were reduced, so he spent more time at home. I started to resent him for being at home and for having the opportunity to spend time with our kids. Most evenings when I returned home, the children were either getting ready for bed or already asleep. After a few months in my new job, it became clear to me that things at home weren't going well when I wasn't there. Some nights, the dishes weren't done when I arrived, or the kids hadn't eaten, and I would find something to be upset with him about, no matter how trivial. I was angry, and it didn't really matter what it was about. He kept saying he would try harder, but he also mentioned how difficult it was being home all the time. That just made me even more furious. Over the next couple of years, things continued to deteriorate. My work hours remained long, and his job was sporadically full-time. There was never a good time for him to work full-time, given my schedule, but we needed the money. Whenever he mentioned that he could take on extra hours, I would complain. The fewer hours he worked, the more I would gripe that he wasn't earning enough money. If he pointed out the inconsistency, I would tell him to figure it out. I knew this bothered him, so I started saying it frequently, using it as an excuse for many things. I truly resented him, and I withdrew from the relationship. I understood that my actions hurt him, but I didn't care. I believed that if he wanted to avoid getting hurt, he should at least try to make me happy. I used this justification when I began talking to another man at work. Initially, I considered him just a friend, but our conversations at work turned into text messages at home. These messages then led to exchanging pictures and videos, and eventually, we tried to find ways to spend time alone together. I knew it was wrong, but it made me feel alive, which my husband hadn't made me feel in years. I was weary of being unhappy, and I was doing this for myself. The worst moment was when I arrived home at a reasonable time and discovered that he had cleaned the entire house, prepared dinner for the family, and selected a movie for all of us to watch together. A couple of years earlier, this would have delighted me, but that night I couldn't even look at him, and I faked being sick. I spent the entire evening in bed while he waited on me, checked on me, and even brought me different food in bed. It made me feel awful, and then I became angry that he made me feel that way. By the end of the night, I was texting with the other guy. Over the next month or two from that night, it didn't matter what he did, he seemed wrong just for existing. Most days he would get so upset with how I treated him, and I would deliberately provoke him into losing his temper because I knew it would happen sooner or later. After most of our fights, he would apologize for something I told him he did wrong, if there even was anything, but I never did. Instead, I would often find a way to make him feel even worse. I believed I was right because he was wrong, and that was all that mattered to me. I even pretended not to care when he found out about my relationship with the guy from work. It pained me internally to see him holding back tears, but I wasn't going to let him see that. He was at his most vulnerable when I chose to tell him that I wanted a divorce. I could almost hear his heart breaking inside his chest. He pleaded and fought, saying we could work through it together. I wasn't really interested in fixing our marriage, but I mostly ended things with the other guy, only because I knew I could go back to it if I wanted. I could see he was trying, and occasionally I would acknowledge that, but most of the time, I was incredibly harsh to him for any and all reasons I could think of. I'm not sure what more the man could have done to make me happy, aside from finding a job that paid enough for me not to have to work at all. He said he was looking, but looking and finding a job are two different things. It was around this time that I discovered this group and a few others. I started posting things about him solely from my perspective, and I received a lot of positive feedback about how I was feeling, which reinforced my belief that I was right. The more I posted, the more validation I received. It wasn't just me who believed that my ex-husband wasn't worth keeping around. The entire internet was telling me how terrible he was. I began saying terrible things to him and even outright ignoring him. I was so confident in my opinion and the opinions of others that I contacted a lawyer and within a couple of weeks had filed for divorce. I kept using this website and a couple of others to find validation for my feelings and get encouragement to go through with a divorce, and eventually, I went ahead with it. The process went relatively smoothly. My ex-husband didn't ask for much except not to get divorced and to try to work things out. I didn't care about that though. He was shattered, but I felt liberated. I had the freedom to do as I pleased without feeling guilt or having to answer to anyone. It was an incredible sense of freedom. However, this feeling didn't last long. In the first month after he moved out, I missed garbage day 3 times. The dishes rarely got cleaned, and the laundry piled up for so long that I had to do the sniff test to see if it could be worn again. I also rarely saw my kids happy. My oldest had seen some messages from the other guy months earlier, and she knew my ex-husband still wanted to try to work things out. It didn't take her long to stop talking to me altogether, except to express her desire to go to my ex-husband's house. The other kids also told me they wanted to live with him. I tried to make them happy, but ended up just buying them toys all the time, and the happiness was short-lived. I was also struggling at work. Being alone, I couldn't work all those extra hours that were expected of me. Eventually, I gave in and started calling my ex-husband to watch the kids. He always came over as soon as he could, asking if I needed anything. When I returned home, I'd find clean dishes, laundry done, and even dinner prepared at times. He didn't say much after I got back, just advised me to call him if I needed anything and left. He always looked so sad when it was time to go. Finally, after a couple of months, my friends convinced me to go on a date. It was for dinner and a movie, and I was initially excited and hopeful, but during dinner, an overwhelming sense of guilt started to consume me, and it got so bad that I didn't even make it to the movie. About a week later, after shedding countless tears, I found myself on a therapist's couch. I recounted everything that had transpired, starting with the work promotion. The therapist didn't agree with me or the encouragement I had received for the divorce. I ended up visiting her office 2 and sometimes 3 times a week. The more I talked to prove that I was right, the more I began to realize how wrong I had been. It was truly heart-wrenching. I'm not sure if I had ever cried as much in my whole life as I did in the first month in her office. After spending around $2,000 on therapy sessions, I came to realize that, while my ex-husband had his faults, I had far worse flaws. I did so many terrible things and said awful things that I wouldn't want to be with me, yet he did. I still remember a moment when he asked me during a lawyer not to proceed with the divorce. However, I went through with it and later boastfully shared on this platform how great it felt. I was completely wrong, and now I can see it. A couple of weeks ago, I approached him as he was leaving the house and asked about the possibility of getting back together. When he looked at me, his eyes welled up with tears, and a couple rolled down his cheeks. He explained that he didn't know if he could. He said that the pain had been too much for too long, and he feared that if we reunited, I might hurt him once again. He mentioned that he had always hoped I would realize how much he loved me, up until the moment I signed the divorce papers. He released an exaggerated sigh of relief. He confessed that this hurt him more than anything else, and that he wasn't sure if he could ever trust me again. I don't blame him. I essentially broke a man who, looking back, was a great husband. I deprived my children of having a wonderful father at home, and I took his children away from him. As for myself, the one who pushed for divorce in search of happiness and freedom, I now spend most of my free time either sitting at home or on a therapist's couch. Please don't solely rely on the advice of anyone on this website or any other regarding divorce. If your marriage is going through a rough patch, start by examining yourself and consider making changes. This advice is for both men and women. Divorce is not enjoyable, and life post-divorce is not a walk in the park. Witnessing your husband broken and your children perpetually unhappy due to your actions is one of the most painful experiences I can imagine. I wish all of you the best and hope you'll give your marriages a second chance.